David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think, as the Minister said, there is some agreement on the importance of science and innovation in our society. The question is, as he quite rightly says, is the emphasis and how we go about it. And I'll get to that in a minute, but I just wanted to first address the bill before us. What I did agree with the Minister on was that this bill was brought about as the Minister said, by the Royal Society approaching Parliament. It didn't come from Parliament. It was at their request. And the Royal Society, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to remind ourselves, is one of the most preeminent, prestigious organisations that we have in New Zealand. It is really the body of real academic learning, of excellence. It's something that we hold up as being at the top of the pyramid in terms of learning. And look at just to give a couple of statistics here to back that up. It's independent. It's a national academy. It has 1,200 members, 344 elected fellows, 10 regional branches, 60 constituent scientific and technological societies. Nearly 20,000 scientists, technologists and technicians are represented by the Society. They do a remarkable job, in other words. And one of the things we've been benefiting from, and I note the chair of the Science and Education Select Committee here, is actually putting on and helping to sponsor scientists, bringing scientists into the Parliament. And they've been very well attended by members of Parliament, going along and listening to some of the more innovative science that's coming out of our institutions right across the board, be the Crown Research Institutes, universities, or the like. This bill, Mr. Chair, was given a pretty thorough reading by the Education and Science Select Committee. Although it appears uncontroversial, there were a number of submissions to it. The bulk of the submissions focused on the question of bringing in humanities into what they believed was a pure scientific organisation. And I think we went through it quite carefully. We brought the Ministry of what now is Science and Innovation back twice to discuss some of the submissions to make sure that we gave them a pretty fair reading, and I think we did. But at the end of the day, this is something that's been decided upon by the Royal Society, and I think that we must respect their wishes. And I don't think, and we'll get to this in the committee stages of when we get looking at this bill more closely, that the various branches that are affiliated to the Royal Society in many ways have the constitutional ability to change what was the real wish of the Royal Society itself. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, we did change and look at changing a couple of the aspects of the bill, and that was to take out, for example, the clause on American studies and try and compress that definition of what humanities constituted. So as my colleague Grant Robinson pointed out, this has gone through quite a large degree of consultation with the Royal Society. It was voted on back in 2009. It was passed earlier last year. It has come to the point where we can discuss it in committee, and I don't think there's going to be too many objections to what it says. I want to just touch on, though, a couple of the points that the Minister mentioned just in his speech, because I don't feel I can really let them go. I mean, there's no doubt, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not going to dispute, unlike the Prime Minister did today in his answers in question time, Statistics New Zealand. He refuted what Statistics New Zealand was actually saying. There has been an increase in R&D take-up, and particularly amongst our businesses. And the real question to me, and I don't think the Minister actually answered this, is how much of that was due to his new initiatives, which of course have only just begun to, the various vouchers, having now waited nearly 2 years for these vouchers and transfers to take effect. Having waited nearly 2 years, there is absolutely no way that he can claim credit that those vouchers have somehow lifted the amount of R&D spending by private firms by 10%. Absolutely no way. I mean, let's look at this. Mr. Speaker, this was from 2008, and we must remember that most of 2008 we were under that much more visionary plan of having 15% tax credits on R&D spend. And so much of that increase, Mr. Speaker, much of that increase was due to the enthusiasm, and I know that was enthusiastic. Those companies were incredibly enthusiastic about a 15% tax credit on their R&D spend, and I can mention perhaps just one company in particular, Gallagher's in Hamilton, one of our preeminent, a great company. It's been going a long time, and what they said to me was that the R&D tax credit allowed them to take, one, more risk, and two, it made them think more strategically and creatively about what was R&D and what wasn't, and be much more strategic about it. That typifies many of the feedbacks that I've had from companies about a 15% tax credit. Instead, we've got a bunch of technology grants which the Minister crows about, but actually, when it comes down to it, of the companies that applied for these grants, Mr. Speaker, 60% were turned down. 60% of those companies that applied for the grants were turned down. And that is extraordinary, wasteful use of taxpayers' resources. And in fact, what the Minister has failed to understand is, in fact, what he's done is he's actually shifted from a tax credit, which actually would have promoted and helped companies actually get off and make real changes to the way that they do R&D. What he's done is given them a handout. He's just simply given them a handout. So the government is now giving companies the R&D extra spend. And what are those companies doing? A lot of those companies are actually transferring what they're doing, the money they're spending now, and shifting it on to other things. That's what they're doing. They're transferring the current money onto other things. I want to bring up one further point. On this, Mr. Speaker. And I'm only mentioning this. I actually started off wanting to speak on this bill from the point of the Royal Society of New Zealand and talk about the Royal Society, the amendment bill, but I can't sit here and listen to what that minister talks about in terms of a step change, which is nothing but really a step backwards. Because look at what we could have had. Look at what we could have had. We could have had a 15% tax credit that would have.
Point of order, Colin King.
This is the second reading, and he is being well wide of the mark.
Well, no, don't need any assistance. Yes, there is a standing order that says we should confine our comments, but it is quite interesting. And and order. And he is rebutting some of the comments that were made earlier, and so he has a minute left, but I will say now that future speakers, because I have it in front of me and I've been reading it quite closely, and tax credits aren't actually mentioned. But no, and from now on, subsequent speakers will confine themselves to the bill. David Shearer, you have a minute left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll conclude on this point, on this argument, and as the minister now feels, I'm sure, suitably chastised about his ridiculous claims, I'll get back to the bill, which the Royal Society, what it's doing here is trying to bring trying to bring humanities and the scientific community together. And it's been something that's been done in both Scotland and in Canada. It hasn't been attempted in England and in Australia, where they have very separate societies. And I think from what I can understand from the Australian experience, they wish they could have this sort of a bill rather than the one they've got. As Grant Robinson quite rightly put it, we need to put our science, our best designers, our humanities together to grow New Zealand. This is one way of doing it. The Royal Society, I think, is being visionary in the way they see the role for both for the Royal Society and for the prosperity of New Zealand, in the way that we will be growing this economy, which is about bringing the best of our talent and our brains together.
So I interrupt the honourable member. His time has expired. Alan Peachy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the spirit of the rebuttal of debate,